so this is Pre-E3.2, which is a review of long division for polynomials. Some of y'all may have seen it before. We will go over it a little bit in Math 119, but I wanted to give you a chance to just kind of practice it so it's not all thrown in really quickly and rushed when we cover it in 3.2 of 119. Okay, so first we need to look at the division algorithm, which says P and D are polynomials such that D of x is not 0. So it can't be the 0 polynomial. And with the degree of D less than or equal to the degree of P. Okay? Then there are unique polynomials, which we will call Q of x and R of x, called the quotient and the remainder, respectively, such that P of x is equal to Q of x times D of x plus R of x. Blah, blah, blah. What are we talking about? Okay, what we're talking about is we're starting out with this original polynomial. Okay, that's our original polynomial, and then they're going to give you a piece of it. Okay, they're going to give you one factor of that polynomial. And what they want you to do is do long division to figure out what the quotient is when you divide those things and what the remainder is if there's a remainder left over. So I'm going to write out what all this stuff is in terms of long division. Okay, P of x will be our divisor. Okay, Q of x is our quotient. D of x is our, oh wait, I got these wrong. Hold on. D of x is our divisor. P of x is our dividend. And R of x is our remainder. Okay, our dividend is the number or the polynomial that's underneath the long division house, so to speak. Okay, so we have our divisor that we're dividing into our dividend. Okay, we get our answer up here, which is our quotient, and once we work it out, whatever's left over is our remainder. Okay, so what this is saying is when we write this out, we're going to write it as our original polynomial, which is our dividend, is the same thing as our quotient times our divisor, right? Whatever's on top times whatever's out front, plus whatever's left over, which is our remainder. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and put this little note here that says if R of x, which remember is our remainder, if that happens to be 0, then that means that our divisor, D of x, is a factor of our original polynomial. Okay, and what that's telling us is if it divides in evenly, if I can divide something into another polynomial and just have a quotient and not have a remainder, that means it went in evenly. And if it goes in evenly, then it's a factor of the original polynomial. If we end up with a remainder, that means it didn't go in evenly, which means that it's not a factor. Okay, so let's go ahead and just refresh polynomial long division. So for all of these examples, I want to go ahead and do the long division, and then it says write your solution in this form. Okay, so we want to write our original polynomial is equal to our quotient times our divisor plus our remainder. Okay, and if our remainder is 0, I'm still going to go ahead and write in plus 0 just so that we get used to how these things are entered. Okay, all right, so here's my P of x and here's my D of x. So they're giving us the dividend and the divisor. So here I'm going to do x plus 9, and I'm going to divide that into my P of x, which is x cubed plus 3x squared minus 18x plus 328. Okay, and when we do long division, we always look at how many terms do we have in our divisor. Here we have an x and a plus 9. So we have 2 terms. So when I go up on top of this house where I write my quotient, I'm going to move over 2 places, and I'm going to write my first number here above the 3x squared. Okay, so what I'm going to look at now is I'm going to look at my highest degree term and now the highest degree term that's listed first. How do I make my x look like an x cubed? Okay, to go from x to x cubed, I would have to multiply by x squared. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to multiply x squared times my my divisor. Okay, so basically I'm distributing this to each of my divisors, and then I'm going to write it underneath here. Okay, but in order to not have lines just going everywhere, I'm going to write it off here to the side. So if I do x squared times my divisor, which is x plus 9, I'm going to go ahead and write it here. So x squared times x gives me the x cubed that I needed. X squared times 9 gives me 9x squared. Okay, and then remember with long division, once I do that multiplication, then I draw my line and I subtract, right? Well, since I'm subtracting more than one term, instead of saying subtract, I'm going to say draw my line, change my signs. So this becomes negative and this becomes negative. And then I just combine down. So here my x to the third power cancels. And when I combine 3x squared and negative 9x squared, I end up with negative 6x squared. Okay? And because I have two terms in my divisor, I have to bring down another term. So minus 18x. And then I start the process over again. I look at my leading term, which here is an x, and I look at the leading term here. What do I need to multiply x by to make it look like negative 6x squared? Well, I need a negative 6 and I need another x. So since I need to multiply my divisor by negative 6x in order to make it negative 6x squared, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write it over here to the side. I'm going to do negative 6x times my divisor, which is x plus 9, and I'm going to write that here. So negative 6x times x gives me negative 6x squared. Negative 6x times 9 is negative 54x. Again, when I draw my line, I change my signs. So this becomes positive 6 and positive 54. So then when I combine down, my 6x squareds cancel, and negative 18 and positive 54 leave me with positive 36x. And then I bring down my next term, which is positive 328. And then I start the process over again. So I look at my leading term, which is an x. What do I need to multiply x by in order to make it 36x? So I need a positive 36. That's what I'm going to write up here. And then I'm going to do positive 36 times my divisor, which is x plus 9, and write it here. Okay. So when I write it here, 36 times x is 36x. 36 times 9 is 324. And then I draw my line and change both signs so they both become negative. And notice now my 36x's will cancel. And when I do 328 minus 324, I'm left with 4. Okay, so notice here, excuse me, my remainder is not a 0. Okay, so I'm just going to put here, remainder is not 0. So if my remainder is not 0, then that means that my d of x is not a factor of my p of x, or my divisor does not go evenly into my dividend. Okay, so I'm going to put here d of x is not a factor of p of x. Okay, so that's part of my answer. I wanted to determine if it was a factor, and now I want to write it in this form. Remember, this form was p of x is equal to q of x times d of x plus r of x. So my original polynomial was x cubed plus 3x squared minus 18x plus 328. And that is the same as my quotient that I just figured out, which here I'll do it in the same color so you can see my quotient, which is x squared minus 6x plus 36, okay, times my original divisor, which they gave me, x plus 9, plus my remainder here, which in this case ended up being 4. Okay, so all I'm doing is doing my long division. If I get a 0 remainder, then it is a factor. If I get a remainder that's not 0, then it's not a factor. And then I want to write out my original polynomial in terms of what I just figured out. So I just figured out that my original polynomial is the same thing as my quotient times my divisor plus 4, because 4 is my remainder. Okay, so let's look at a couple more, and then I'll have y'all do y'all's homework. And I will tell you, your homework for this section is not a worksheet. It's a My Math Lab quiz. Okay, and in your homework, they'll give you the original polynomial and they'll just say it's equal to like the quotient times the divisor plus the remainder. And you'll type in what your quotient was and what your remainder is. Okay, so make sure that you understand which is which. Okay, they'll give you the dividend, which is your P of X, and they'll give you your divisor, which is D of X, and then you just type in your quotient and your remainder. Okay. All right, let's look at another one. So on this next page, again, they're giving me my P of X and my D of X. So I'm going to do the long division. So I'm going to do X plus 2 divides into. Now, one thing I do want to point out is notice I have an X to the 4th, and then it goes down to X squared. So notice right here, I am missing an X cubed term. If I don't have an X cubed term, I have to put one in. But I have to put in a 0 placeholder, okay, because I don't have an X cubed. So when I write it out, I need to go ahead and put in a 0 X cubed, okay. Same thing here. If I start writing this out, I have X to the 4th plus, I don't have an X cubed term, so I put 0 X cubed minus 2X squared plus, notice here I don't have an X term either. Here I'm missing an X term. So if I don't have an X term, I put in a 0X. Okay, you can't just put in an X because that implies that you have one X. So make sure there's a 0 there. Okay, same thing, I have 2 terms in my divisor, so I move over 2 places. I'm going to put my first number here above 0x cubed, and I look at my leading term, which is x, and this leading term, which is x to the 4th. What do I have to multiply x by to make it x to the 4th? I need to multiply it by x cubed. So I'm going to do x cubed times my divisor, and I'm going to write it over here. Now on your homework, you don't have to write it out in this much detail, but I'm doing it just to help keep things clear. So x cubed times x plus 2, x cubed times x gives me x to the 4th, x cubed times 2 gives me 2x cubed. Then remember, I draw my line, change my signs. So my first 2 terms cancel, and then 0 minus 2 leaves me with negative 2x cubed, and I bring down my next term, which is negative 2 cubed, squared, sorry. Okay, and then I start the process over again. I look at my leading term, which here is x. What do I have to multiply x by to make it look like negative 2x cubed? So I need a negative 2, and then to go from x to x cubed, I need an x squared. So I'm going to do negative 2x squared times my divisor, which is x plus 2, and I'm going to write that here. So negative 2x squared times x is negative 2x cubed. Negative 2x squared times 2 is negative 4x squared. Then again, I draw my line, change my signs, so they're both going to become positive, and then I combine down. My 2x cubes cancel, and I'm left with positive 2x squared, and then I bring down my next term, which is plus 0x. Okay, start the process again. What do I have to multiply x by now to make it look like 2x squared? I need a positive 2, and I need another x. So I'm going to do 2x times my divisor, which is x plus 2. I'm going to write that here. So 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times 2 is 4x. And then I draw my line, change both signs. So notice my first two terms are now opposite. And when I combine 0 and negative 4, I get negative 4x. And then I bring down my next term, which is negative 8. Okay. I look at my leading term, which here is an x. What do I have to multiply x by to make it look like negative 4x? I need to multiply by negative 4. I don't need an x because I already have one. So I'm going to do negative 4 times my divisor, which is x plus 2, and write that here. So negative 4 times x is negative 4x. Negative 4 times positive 2 is negative 8. Okay. Then I draw my line and change my signs so they both become positive. And notice my first term cancels, and my second term, when I combine them, leaves me with a 0. So notice here, I ended up with a 0 remainder, when I end up with a 0 remainder, that means that this divisor is a factor of my original polynomial. So I'm going to put here remainder is 0. So d of x is a factor of p of x. So I'm just going to put up here, yes, is a factor. Okay. On your homework, if you just say yes, I think in my math lab it gives you two choices. You can, it says, is this a factor? And you just check yes or no. Okay. All right. So I know it's a factor. So now I want to go ahead and write out my my solution. Remember, we're writing out our solution in the form p of x is equal to q of x times d of x plus r of x. So I need to put in my original polynomial, okay, which is my dividend. So this means that x to the 4th plus, and I don't have to put the zeros in, sorry. X to the 4th minus 2x squared minus 8 is equal to the quotient that we just came up with, which is x cubed minus 2x squared plus 2x minus 4 times our divisor, which was given to us, x plus 2, plus our remainder, which here was 0. Okay, and I am going to go ahead and put the 0 in. On an exam, if you don't put the 0, that's fine, but in my math lab, they have you enter the remainder even if it's 0. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that just so it mimics what my math lab wants. Okay. All right, let me look at one more, and then y'all can get to your homework. Same idea here. Now notice I'm missing a lot of terms here. Okay, I'm going from x cubed down to a constant. So I'm missing x squared and I'm missing x. So I'm going to put zero placeholders in for those terms. So I'm going to go ahead and write out my divisor, x plus 5, and I'm dividing that into x cubed plus 0x squared plus 0x minus 125. Okay. I have two terms, so I move over two places. I'm going to write my first number above the 0x squared. What do I have to do to my x to make it look like x cubed? I need x squared. So I'm going to do x squared times x plus 5 and write that here. So x squared times x is x cubed. X squared times 5 is 5x squared. Whoops, that's a weird 5. There we go. And then I draw my line, change my signs. They both become negative. My x cubes cancel, and I'm left with negative 5x squared. And I bring down my next term, which is 0x. Then I say, what do I need to multiply my x by so that it looks like negative 5x squared? I need to multiply by negative 5x. So I'm going to distribute negative 5x to my divisor, which is x plus 5, and write that here. So negative 5x times x is negative 5x squared. Negative 5x times positive 5 is negative 25x. Okay? I draw my line, change both signs, so they both become positive. Notice my 5x squareds will now cancel, and x and 25 leave me with 25x. And then I just bring down my next term, which is minus 125. So what do I need to multiply my x with to end up with 25x? I need a positive 25. So I'm going to go ahead and do 25 times my divisor, which is x plus 5, and write that here. So 25 times x is 25x. 25 times 5, excuse me, is 125. And then notice when I draw my line and change my signs, my 25x's are going to cancel, but my numbers are not. They're not opposites. So negative 125 and negative 125 gives me negative 250. Okay. So again here, my remainder is not 0, which means that my divisor is not a factor. So r of x is not 0, so not a factor. So I'm just going to put up here, no, it's not a factor. And then I'm going to go ahead and write out my original. My original is x cubed minus 125, and that's equal to our quotient, which we just came up with, is x squared minus 5x plus 25 times our divisor, which was given to us, x plus 5, plus our remainder, which in this case is negative 250. Okay, and I put it in parentheses. Like I said, on a test, that plus and that minus would just become a minus, but in my math lab, they give you a box to enter your remainder. So if your remainder is negative, make sure you put the negative in there. Okay. All right, so this is the end of Pre-E3.2. You should now be able to complete your My Math Lab quiz on this 118 section. Let me know if you have any questions.